The Blue Mountain. My passion for being a mountaineer was nurtured during my adolescence through reading the epic climbs starring Gaston Rebuffat, the famous French mountaineer, with his conquest for the first time of 6 north faces of the Alps, including the Dru, the Grandes Jorasses, the Eiger, and the Cervino, that is the Matterhorn on its Italian side, its ascents to Annapurna in the Himalayas, which even has a higher fatality rate than Everest because of its steepness, and the Italian Dolomites, and also for reading the achievements of Maurice Herzog and Louis Lachenal, the legendary guide from Chamonix, as well as of Edmund Hillary and the Nepalese Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, who were the first to climb Mount Everest, of which I prefer the Tibetan name of Chomolungma, or Goddess Mother of the World, and about the Englishmen George Mallory and Andrew Irvine, who 29 years earlier disappeared very close to their summit of Everest on an English expedition prior to Sir John's hunt. I also followed a little the career of Reinhold Messner, the incomparable Italian mountaineer who was the first to ascend the 14 peaks of more than 8,000 meters high on the planet, and the first to climb Mount Everest without oxygen and alone. This among the admired mountaineers that I can remember. My beginnings. I would be 12 years old, and after having climbed the largest trees in my neighborhood, the Cerro del Colli, and the highest scaffolding of the expiatory temple still under construction in my city, Guadalajara, in the company of my dear friend Ricardo, I decided one day to visit the office of Father Luis, located in the private secondary school where I would soon enter, and armed with courage, I asked Father Huicho if he could sign me up for the first excursion of the year of the Alpine Club that he had founded, to the Diente, which was a group of rocks in the area of the town of Rio Blanco, located about 7 kilometers from the town of Zapopan, Jalisco, and that were very important for climbers in the region. Father Luis, in high spirits, signed up that young 6th-year primary school student for his next big adventure. In any case, and thanks to the kindness of Father Luis, I was able to register and participate in a climbing excursion to the rocks of Rio Blanco, even though I had not yet entered the first year of high school. I was about 12 years old, and for me it was a real challenge to overcome fear and climb the Diente, a 30-meter high rock, helped by my companions, and once up there to rappel it down. My feat caused me great satisfaction for the achievement attained, there is no doubt about it. Thanks to the fact that the group of rock climbers from the Alpine Club was small at that time, I was chosen to be one of them and to rappel down the Rock Eliente at night, together with other colleagues, in an exhibition that commemorated the Alpine Club Feast Day. This meant a great challenge also, because it was necessary to climb the rock at night and rappel it down, helped only by the incipient light of fireworks that bounced tied to the lower part of the descent rope while we descended. This certainly increased my confidence as an aspiring mountain climber and glacier mountaineer. Our enthusiasm for climbing as much as we could between excursion and excursion of our Alpine Club came to such a degree that with the leadership of Guillermo, my brother, the most enthusiastic and 2 years younger than me, we descended from the roof of our own house, rappelling down in the style of the brilliant Catalan climber and skier who at the age of 24 had several first ascents to the Montserrat Massif, Ernesto Mayafre Planella, whose technique was done only with ropes adjusted to the body of the climber and without the protection of any rappelling equipment. And also, we were doing Tyrolean passages up between sidewalk and sidewalk of the street where we live by joining a long rope from tree to tree, thus crossing the entire width of the street. This before we were totally forbidden those crazy things strictly by both our parents. The Popocatépetl. I still remember it vividly. I was crying profusely in the middle of the thickest blanket of fog in which I had to climb a mountain at my 13 years old. I was very cold, thirsty and hungry, and the memory came to my mind in those moments that at that same time I could be having a placid breakfast in the dining room of my house without any cold and sitting comfortably. However, my harsh reality was that I was climbing the Popocatépetl volcano glacier towards its crater, separated by a few meters, I did not know how many, of my fellow hikers from whom I did not see because of the dense blanket of clouds that surrounded me, nor those who were going ahead of me walking up, nor those who were coming up behind me. I knew that I was approaching the largest crevasse of the glacier, and soon I reached it, but I could see it and pass it safely thanks to the indication that someone had put in its surroundings so that would notice its presence. Seeing briefly through the dense fog, my companions who were climbing in front of me calmed me down, and I continued. The last meters that separated me from the lower lip of the crater cost me a lot of work, because the snow was very deep and I was submerging up to my knees, walking almost without advancing anything in it. And there, from the effort and my loneliness, I cried again. When I finally reached the crater of the volcano, I could immediately recognize the smell of sulfur rising from the lower cone of the crater. There was no one in that place, but to continue walking towards the summit that was to the right and at the top of the lip of the crater was not a problem because there was good visibility there. I made it to the top and met some of my colleagues who were already celebrating their ascent. My philosophy as a mountaineer. There were all the mountaineers that I admired and mentioned above: dignity, chivalry, compassion, camaraderie, and a lot of honesty and professionalism. I remember that for many years now our alpine guide Chava, complained knowingly because we were in Zermatt, Switzerland, and he witnessed it, that even if you had no climbing experience, with a good payment in dollars to a Swiss guide, he could take anyone to the top of the Matterhorn. Situation that caused many fatal accidents where guide and client died, and I do not doubt it, continues to cause them. In fact, a day before our arrival in Zermatt, a guide and his 3 companions died because they had an accident in a very risky area near the top of the Matterhorn. As the tourists pulled down their guide down while sliding, and they all rushed to the abyss since they came strung up with their rope. I also remember my great disappointment when, after 2 days of ascent and a bivouac in a rather cold refuge of the glacier, our group of mountaineers embraced each other with pleasure for the great achievement of crowning our effort at the summit of Mont Blanc, the highest in Western Europe, when suddenly we saw and heard the great roar caused by an helicopter that descended on the top right next to where we were. Same helicopter that had been hired by tourists who spoke English and who descended of the same for a few moments to take photos and celebrate. Celebrate what, I wonder? What was their effort to deserve to be in that sacred place? To open their wallets? The last straw of this lack of alpine mystic now happens with the sad commercialization of Mount Everest, to give an example, which suffers every year a high number of commercial expeditions that take clients to the summit, or at least they try to do so, at a cost of service with a guide from $40,000 to $80,000 per person to clients without any experience in high altitude climbing, and they do it from both the Nepalese side and the Chinese side of the mountain, filling it with garbage and sadly with corpses. The spirit of adventure no longer exists, only crowds that cost and will continue to cost lives. 1 in 4 people who climb to Everest die. The real mountaineer, said the great Reinhold Messner, is aware, responsible for himself, and even fearful and respectful of the mountain to which he goes to discover not how big he is, but how fragile and weak he is. In our days, high altitude mountaineering has become a tourist spectacle. Help from heaven. There are also mountaineering angels and climbing angels, I think, because I have personally witnessed various events and even personally experienced some in which divine intervention has appeared to help us not die in the mountain without any doubt. An event that I remember very well was when we were going down from the top of Mount Blanc, which we decided to do in a single day, although it took us 2 days to go up the moraine, its rocky portion, even climbing on some parts, and then climbing the glacier. But due to the pressure of time, we could no longer manage to go down from the top through the hill where we initially climbed the first day of the ascent. And we had to go down a rocky slope that went down parallel to it. We had to go down enough, maybe to the middle of the mountain, out of necessity and in order not to deviate much from the slope from where we were and where we climbed initially, which would allow us to further go down to our initial starting point, the outbound train station that took us to the moraine of Mont Blanc, since by the hill where we went, this was now impossible. It was late in the afternoon when we reached a point where it would be possible to cross from one slope to another in relative safety. However, being already late in the day and due to the melting, several avalanches of mud and rocks were already descending violently and noisily through the intermediate space between slope and slope, which was a kind of semi-flat ravine of about 30 meters in length that had to be crossed running between avalanche and avalanche. That was the price we had to pay to get to original slope that we had climbed before. The way to cross it was individual, and immediately after an avalanche of mud and stones had passed, once on the other side, the mountaineer took shelter behind large rocks on the slope. However, Ernesto, who had been among the first to reach the other side, jokingly perched on one of the large rocks that were near the ravine where the avalanche were constantly descending. Without any warning and totally at the wrong time, a volley of large rocks rushed again to where Ernesto was, who, before our screams of alarm and the roar of the rocks that were going down, only managed to shrink his body and become a ball on the same rock from where he was jumping when a huge rock crashed and exploded onto the big rock he was on, and just about 50 centimeters from where he was. Fortunately, out of the enormous shock, Ernesto was unharmed. The mountain can at any time decide whether or not to let us return safely, so the mountaineer must always respect that our most dangerous moments are when we're almost about to reach base camp or a safe base, and it is in those moments that if we neglect ourselves, and it could happen due to fatigue and loosening the body due to the proximity of the destination, this can give us a hard time or even stop us there forever. That was precisely what I explained at one of my children. When we were about to reach the base of the cable car up the mountain of Jasper, Canada, when he inadvertently began to stumble with danger of rolling downhill. Fortunately, I managed to stop this fall with my prompt assistance. You do not play with the mountain. to the snowy peak with Chava. The mountain is our great teacher. It can, on some special occasions, take us in 2 or 3 days from adolescence to a more mature youth. The Nevado de Colima or Zapotepetl is an extinct volcano of 4,227 meters high, located in the state of Jalisco, Mexico, and it's a national park and protection area, having become a refuge for fauna species, and that has also always been the seedbed that prepares those who want to climb higher and more difficult mountains such as Popocatépetl, Iztaccíhuatl, or Citlaltépetl, since it has ideal characteristics to form and train those who want to become good mountaineers. It can be very cold in winter with temperatures as low as minus 15 centigrades, minus 15 degrees centigrade at night, and even risky due to the amount of snow that accumulates and the compulsory climbing that must be done even on its less difficult routes. That adventure awaited me and a small group of friends who joined Chava, the guide of our Alpine Club, who organized this excursion during the summer holidays on its own initiative, and that was not part of those organized by the Alpine Club to which we all belonged. Chava generously invited us to participate in a week-long excursion to the mountains and the sea with the intention of, as he used to say, stretch your legs. It was a matter of climbing the Nevado de Colima from its base by trails to the La Jolla, which is an alpine refuge, in a single day, and the next day to attack its top and returning, if possible, to the base of the mountain where Chava had parked his van on the same second day of ascent. And later, as a well-deserved rest, we would go to the port of Manzanillo to enjoy for about 3 days in the beautiful beaches of Colima. Once we passed Ciudad Guzman, Chava headed through a dirt road towards a semi-hidden place at the base of the mountain and a little to his right, a spot that he previously knew where he could safely park his van. From this point, we would start the ascent. It was barely dawn when we arrived and the cold was intense. Almost immediately after loading our backpacks with everything we needed, we started the hike. After several hours of walking between narrow paths with tall and thorny bushes and local foliage, we finally began to see more high mountain canopies, such as pines and oaks, that were an unequivocal sign that we were approaching La Jolla. However, despite our youth, we were at the point of collapse due to tiredness, but we could not afford to lose track of Chava, who was walking ahead. Personally, I was completely drenched with sweat and panting after several hours of uphill walking. Fortunately, after an area of close vegetation, we reached the top of a mound where the trail ended and gave way to a beautiful and impressive view. The esplanade where the refuge of La Jolla was located, and in the distance, the impressive peak of the Nevado de Colima. Once inside the refuge, we did not find any mountaineer, and we proceeded to light a fire under one of its chimneys and prepare something to eat. After a lively chat, we settled into our respective sleeping bags and immediately fell into a deep and restful sleep after a long and very heavy but productive ascension journey. The next day, very early, Chava had already found the coals that were still burning in the fireplace where we had prepared our bonfire the night before and started a new fire to heat our space, hurrying us to start our ascent that should take us to the top of the Nevado de Colima mountain. The sun hadn't risen yet, and after a brief breakfast and when we were ready to follow him, he surprised me, and I don't think only me but my companions as well, asking me to take charge of the group, taking them as an impromptu guide to the top, since he had decided not to come up with us. The reason for his request was because Chava was still recovering from a road accident on his famous and beautiful BMW motorcycle not so long ago, when he returned from teaching at the junior high school where we all studied and where he was a teacher. An incident that sent him to the hospital with a broken ankle, and I knew that because I visited him at the clinic. Chava still resented walking a lot with that ankle in recovery, and for this reason he asked us that once we returned from the top of the peak, we should immediately go to the path that had brought us from the base of the mountain, to go down through it, promising to leave us along the trail signs in the vegetation where he would pass, so we did not lose the trail until we joined him in his vehicle. He will go down then ahead of us during the day. We all stayed cold with the news, and Chava, with his usual optimism, said goodbye to us with a wide smile, wishing us a happy ascent. Unfortunately for me, even when the sun had risen, it was not possible to see the peak because it was shrouded in clouds and there was fog even in the area of La Jolla where we were. Time was running out, since in these new conditions, after reaching the top of the peak, we had to go down not only to La Jolla, but to the base of the mountain where Chava's van was located, and all in a single day. Consequently, I decided to try a more direct route to the peaks to save time, thus avoiding taking the path through the dirt road that rose from La Jolla to the antennas that were located on the southern slope of the Nevado de Colima, considering that this would take us too long. What an adventure! So, without further ado, our courageous and jovial group of mountaineers headed straight for the peaks, going down and up two big hills to cross the river that meandered behind La Jolla, and going as far as we could through steep hills with tall pine trees, but always to climbing to the left to avoid going down the paths that led to the area where the Devil's Cave is located, which would save us time and cut us off quite a bit of time. However, I was very careful as far as possible because the fog prevented us from all visibility upwards in not diverting the group too much to the left, because if we did, we would find ourselves unknowingly surrounding the North Peak on its backside and on the direct route known as the La Jota, which due to its degree of difficulty would not be the most appropriate. Thus, we continued for a long time blindly, but with great impetus, and when I was beginning to despair, due to the rush of time, the fog cleared and we found ourselves almost head-on with the North Peak, which greatly encouraged us all. Then, encouraged without stopping the march, we simply crossed diagonally through the sand banks of the North Peak towards the South Peak, and finally to Colimotes, which is a ridge that connects with the antennas and from which the Colima volcano can be observed at a distance. From there, we walked to the back of the southern peak, which through an easy climb connected us with a channel that rises between cliffs of rock to the top of the southern peak. Finally, after climbing the gutter without much trouble, we made it to the top. I was proud to be able to guide my teammates to this alpine goal. Chava had not been wrong to honor me with this responsibility. After the hugs and congratulations of rigor, we enjoyed the beauty of the place and the view, and after a brief snack, we got ready to go down the channel and towards Colimotes, where we would deviate to take now the Devil's Cave route, which was the one that it would take us down faster towards the Hoya Alpine Refuge. We continued going down at a good pace without major setbacks through the Devil's Cave until we managed to reach La Jolla. However, it was already around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had to quickly pick up some things that we left in the Alpine Refuge and relocate everything in our backpacks. And after a short late lunch, we headed towards the hill where the path that led down Chava had taken us up the mountain. It was very comforting to see clearly marked the signs that Chava had left us to avoid going down through other trails that would divert us when we started our descent. But at the same time, those signs were becoming rarer until they disappeared completely. We continued descending, although it was evident that we were already walking on a semi-wooded plain, and in the ringing darkness we got a major shock when we came across a bright-eyed cow when we shone our lamp on the animal. Then, almost spontaneously due to the impression we received, we began to shout at Chava, looking for an answer from the darkness. Shortly after, walking, and at first in a very incipient way, we thought we heard shouts of response from a distance coming from a wooded area that we approached with haste. As we heard better the responses of the person who answered us, our hearts jumped when we found that the voice came from Chava, who in an incredible way was waiting for us placidly, sitting with his back in a tree and his backpack next to him in the most complete darkness. The effusive hugs of rigor did not take long to appear, as well as the joy of Chava to know about the success of our climb. Altogether, and satisfied, we walked the section that separated us from Chava's van, in which we all settled in, ready to leave for the warm beaches of Manzanillo and the rest of the adventure was a well-deserved rest in the sea that helped us greatly. When we returned to Guadalajara, Chava, our beloved mentor, began the distribution of boys to their respective homes. This ended an unforgettable adventure for which I am sure we are all very grateful. Some ascents of my adolescence. Many ascents were to continue in my teenage years at my junior high school alpine club. Of those that I can remember, there is one that took us to the Quinceo mountain of 2,787 meters high, an inactive volcano in Michoacan, near the city of Morelia, that requires a long walk and ascent that is crowned by a formidable view from its top. The following are other ascents that I still have in my memory. The Pelón de Ñado mountain of 3,320 meters high that owes its name to the river that rises on its southern slope, formed by igneous rocks and covered by a large forest mass. It is located about 5 kilometers from the town of Aculco, in the state of Mexico, from where the hike begins, up steep slopes and a brief rock climb to its peak, where the Peñanado is. Climbing that we did more with intuition than with knowledge of a route, but that we crowned with success. The Garcia mountain of 2,760 meters high, located in the southwest of the Chapala Lake in the state of Jalisco, allows from its summit to appreciate several populations and a large extension of the Chapala riverside, as well as to the south the Sayula Lake and the volcano of Colima on clear days. We went a short hike up a dirt road and then through several trails that we started through the town of San Luis Soyatlan. A hike of about 8 kilometers, in which the highlight for me was the enormous thirst that constantly accompanied me, as well as the enormous number of flying insects that we would find at the summit. The 2,306 meter high Cougar Mountain in western Canada was a huge hike in the woods until we reached the moraine and rocky area of the mountain, whose climb then became more difficult. However, we managed to continue towards the summit, which we could not reach because it had an occupant who, when he saw us, ran towards us. It was a black bear that caused an interesting stampede between all of us to go down the mountain immediately. The situation calmed down after a little while, but you cannot always beat the mountain, especially if it has its land allies. The mountain of Tequila in Jalisco, of 2,920 meters high and close to the world-famous town of Tequila, where the style beverage is made, is an extinct stratovolcano that has a dome formed by lava that sealed the mouth of the volcano, and that constitutes an interesting and risky climb even for its most accessible part. tip of the dome is its highest part. It is a long ascent from the main highway and very comforting because its ravines are dense with forest and beautiful, or at least they seem that to me. There, I learned and successfully put into practice our guide's Chava secret to ascend without fatigue, to always take a leisurely and rhythmic step pace when climbing. Rhythmic step pace. And it worked. The 2,510-meter Peña de Bernal in the state of Querétaro is a volcanic mountain crowned by a monolith of igneous rock that is a 433-meter high volcanic plug considered among the highest in the world. I confess, I remember at least our first attempt to climb it failed, because when we reached La Peña, we had no idea where to start climbing on the huge vertical rock, and we had to return. On our second attempt, we reached the summit because we found a risky route, but that it did not involve too much vertical climbing bordering to the right of La Peña. It was one of my most satisfactory ascents due to the natural beauty of the enormous peña and the pleasing view from its top. And it's very interesting and chilling adventure of rappelling rather than climbing. We had it on the rock called El Fistón, a monolithic rock that is located in the place of giant rocks of the Sierra of San Esteban, whose most famous rock is the Diente, located north of the town of Rio Blanco in Zapopan, Jalisco. The Fistón is located in the same mountain, but just on the other side where the Diente rock is situated, and in exactly the same direction. This rock will have a 60-meter drop when rappelling it. Going up by its easiest route to its top is not problematic, but going down by its most difficult area, which is what we did, was definitely an expert rappelling feat, since one in position and all ready to start rappelling, whoever rappels down it does not always have a point of contact for their feet as you go down, and you only have the strength of your arms when descending to avoid going down too fast, since you have to push back to the void in some sections. And finally, the Tiwinot, which means many peaks in the native Shoshone language, located in the American Rockies. What a beautiful mountain! At 3,757 meters, 3,757 is the sixth tallest mountain in the Teton series of mountains of the Teton National Park in the state of Wyoming. We climbed it from its base through its wooded slopes until we found a route through its moraine and its stony peaks, not without risks, and climbing some vertical slopes until we reached its summit. The view of the Grand Teton's massive vertical wall and Mount Morn was grand and impressive. Despite the warnings of an American park ranger about the possibility of finding bears if we went down late, there was no problem and we returned without any eventuality. Why do we climb mountains? Why? For me, the answer is very simple. To be close to heaven, to overcome the gravity of this world a little, to talk with God, see Him and feel Him, to participate in the beautiful, the good and the true that are manifested in nature, God's creation, to receive God's revelation about what we have to do in this world. Great events for those who believe in God took place in the mountains. Moses received the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, Exodus 19:3, King James Version 1960. Jesus taught us how to enter the kingdom of heaven with his sermon on the Beatitudes on the side of a mountain believed to be north of the Sea of Galilee, Matthew 5:1, King James Version. Jesus was transfigured on Mount Tabor, Luke 9:28-36, King James Version, and he frequently withdrew to the mountain to pray, Luke 6:12, King James Version. In 2024, St. Francis of Assisi went to Mount Alvernia in Italy, about 160 kilometers from Assisi, to pray, where he built a small cell and received the stigmata of the person and the passion of Christ. Mary, the mother of Jesus, decided to appear on Mount Podro, located on the outskirts of the town of Medjugorje in Bosnia. The mountain is an ideal place to achieve inner silence and pray. Climbing the mountain means rising from everyday life. It means stopping looking at our existence in such a low way. It means being able to raise one's gaze to God and eternally climb to a higher level of living and loving. Climbing the mountain is daring to truly see the interior that often escapes and evades with the noise of the world between fireworks, applause, and ephemeral adulation of a world that reinforces everything that is not intimacy with God. Vallenilla M. or Up to the Mountain in the Bible 2018. The mountaineer poet expresses it unequivocally when moving away from his mountain summit. The time was pressing and the cold was numbing, and we had to go down. Sadness to that again, to that great disorder, civilization, to leave you to get away, little by little, step by step, going down. So sad. How difficult it is to see you here, Jesus. They all deny him, they forget, they step on you, but I have already seen you. I felt you in the mountain, you showed yourself, Lord, there in my partner, and in him you will be in the brother companion, and there I will see you, I will try, you will see, even here, away from my mountain, from you, in this disorder, civilization, and I never forget you, and I always wait for you, I always miss you, there on my mountain, my blessed